I don't even know how to set this up other than to say, if you watch that game on Saturday night, I think you have to feel pretty good about where you stack up on any field with Ohio State. The last 2 years are obviously proof of that. But you get to Ryan Day's not even his press conference. He's on the field cutting a WWE promo with, I believe it was Melissa Stark or Catherine Tappan, my bad. And he is sitting here stuffing Lou Holtz in a locker, beating his chest about how tough his football team is. He's red in the face. His voice is cracking with the intensity of your high school algebra teacher coming in and yelling at the class. Ryan Day, Michigan is firmly in the heads of the Ohio State Buckeyes. He's yelling about Lou Holtz. He's stuffing an 86-year-old man in a trash can after the game. Michigan totally owns that program right now. And let's give these guys, again, I'm sure this will show up in someone's hype video for Ohio State week. I'm sure it will show up on someone's message board, maybe not. And I'm not one to take, to come on the air and take unwarranted pot shots, but that should be a game you come out of as an Ohio State fan and say, you know what? We didn't play our best ball, but that's a gritty win against a top 10 team on the road. We had to get 1 yard to win it, which, was made easier by the fact that Notre Dame couldn't get 11 guys on the field. And you come out of it with Ryan Day kind of just, again, you want to see a guy go out and defend his team, but, he comes out and says they've only played one bad half of football the last 2 years. This guy it's like the old line from The Wedding Singer. I wish Chris was here right now. He's losing his mind, and I'm reaping all the benefits. So thoughts on Ryan Day, thoughts on Ohio State, and a guy that, Michigan's just firmly in this guy's head right now. And you could tell, like you could even hear it in his voice. It's like the bullied kid in class who finally gets sick of getting made fun of.
I don't even know where to start after everything you just hit on there. But no, I mean, I agree. Like we were texting late on Saturday about it. Like I couldn't believe what I saw. I mean, it was a complete meltdown for 86-year-old Lou Holtz to be in his head was just crazy. I mean, Lou Holtz is a former national championship winning Notre Dame coach. I mean, he said that when Ohio State loses, that the other team's tougher. I don't think that's some huge shot. I mean, I think it's probably also true. It's nothing that, I think that they don't realize themselves. I remember last year he put in all those signs all over the locker room, toughness and physicality. And I'll say if you have to say that you're tough and, go on national TV and say that you're tough, you're probably not that tough. I think tough teams would, people say it about them. They don't need to say it themselves. With that said, I thought Ohio State, that was a very good win for them. And their defense is very good and probably pretty tough as well. But Notre Dame able to run on them a little bit in the second half and just a pretty solid game, defensive slugfest. But man, and the one interesting thing, talking to our friend Isaiah Hull today at the Michigan press conference, is this could be a detriment for Ohio State if he thinks that they're as tough as possible and that they're kind of a complete product in that area. I mean, it might be a detriment to them to think that and go about the rest of the season that way, because they're not going to get tested all that much either until they play Penn State and then Michigan. So, we're really just going to find out at the end of November. I don't know, I couldn't even imagine Jim Harbaugh going on a tirade like that, a complete meltdown. It was kind of embarrassing for Ryan, but it made my Saturday night. It was entertaining. It was good content. I'll give him that.
That's like 2 of the last 3 Saturday nights where I feel like I was kind of sort of snuggled in for the night, and you're watching something on TV or you're scrolling through social media, and then you sit up in bed and gasp. And obviously Mel Tucker stuff was a very different situation, a different kind of exposing who you really are to the world. But the Ryan Day thing, again, it's I'm not – his team played well. I think on offense and defense, they're a little better up front than I think some people were giving them credit for. I know Notre Dame ran on them a little bit, but again, Notre Dame's a good football team too. But God, I mean, let's talk about them for a second too. I mean, you go out there and the last 2 snaps of the game, you can't even get 11 defenders on the field. That's Rich Rod and Hoke level stuff. And I hate to say it, but you go out there and do stuff like that. And I feel like that kind of stuff doesn't go away. There are mistakes that happen here and there, but I feel like there have been a couple Notre Dame games the last few years where there's been some kind of just egregious, detailed error that causes them to lose a football game. And listen, again, that was a great game for the most part. I mean, I like those low scoring games, and it's kind of, I know there's been a lot of controversy about the clock rule and what's going on with all that, but something I like about the NFL, not that I want college football to emulate the NFL, is that possessions matter, and what you do with possessions matter, and it makes down to down what your play calls are on offense and defense. Everything's just more critical when there's just not as many chances to get the football back. And Notre Dame had their chances to win that game on that final drive. Dropped an interception. I think there were a couple penalties, obviously the stuff at the end, but I'm not going to sit here and make any grand proclamations about Ohio State. I don't, right now through 4 games, I don't think Kyle McCord is still figuring it out, but not quite the caliber of guy that they've had there. Made some mistakes in that game. And I think the biggest thing about Ohio State right now is when you look at them is they are a Ferrari that's trying to put a snowplow on their, on the vehicle. And it's like, dude, you guys, you don't need to cry and whine about how people don't respect you for being tough. You have Marvin Harrison Jr. I watched Sunday Night Football last night. Devontae Adams gets targeted 18 or 19 times in the game.
On my fantasy team. He's on my fantasy team.
Yes. And there's a comment here that says prevent defense is terrible and no one should ever run it.
Yeah, third and 19.
I tweeted that out. Prevent defense is losing defense. But yeah, Ohio State, I mean, I think, again, I don't want to, this is a Michigan podcast, but when we talk about the buildup to that game, to me right now, the difference is, Michigan looks dominant, but still methodical and still kind of figuring it out. Whereas I think Ohio State, you saw glimpses of like what their vintage self was last week. They put up 63 points, but this whole trying to convince the world you're tough instead of just going out there and being about it. I don't know. It's almost like if you're a Michigan fan, you almost want them to have, to hit on Isaiah's point, you almost want them to have that type of bravado instead of being humbled. Because we've seen Ohio State teams lose early in the year before, and then obviously the train gets rolling, you're hitting on all cylinders, and then we see what happens. But I just thought it was interesting to kind of bring up the state of where things are at there. It was obviously a big storyline on Saturday night. Ryan Day yelling about how awesome his Dodge Stratus is. I don't know. Hey, you have any other thoughts on the state of the Ohio State Buckeyes or anything like that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think most Michigan fans were probably rooting against Ohio State, which is fair. I will say Ohio State winning that game and giving Notre Dame a loss, and they still have some tough games to go, might not be the worst thing either when you look at the playoff race. Last year Ohio State was able to sneak in even with the loss to Michigan. Didn't have to play in the Big Ten championship game. That wouldn't have happened if Notre Dame was better last year, maybe 0 losses or 1 loss. So there was just kind of no one else that could stop them from getting in. They had to be the 4th seed. So if you're Michigan and you're in that spot this year, obviously it's more ideal if you beat Ohio State. But if you're in those shoes this year, you don't want a Notre Dame lingering there either. So you can beat Ohio State. You can't beat Notre Dame. So to get Notre Dame a loss isn't the worst thing. And then for Ohio State to have their coach, basically admit that, he did that, Michigan, he's still thinking about Michigan after that game and how they had a bad half up in Ann Arbor, failing to mention that they got outscored 28-3, should have been worse with the pity whistle in Columbus last year. I think it's kind of a best case. You sit back at the end of the night and you say it's best case. With that said, though, it was a good win from Ohio State. And, with Kyle McCord, I understand that, he did what he needed to do at the end of that game. I think it was more about their receivers and maybe Notre Dame's mistakes, as well as you kind of hit on with the 10 guys on the field, the prevent defense, 3rd and 19, and all that. But Kyle McCord's probably going to get better throughout the year too. Week 4 last year, J.J. McCarthy's a first-year starter, and he's running all over the place against Maryland, almost turning the ball over. He got a lot better and went into that game at the end of the year against Ohio State, and it was fantastic. So I think Kyle McCord's going to get better too, but he looked a little bit shaky at times there. And I think if you look at things, Michigan and Penn State have the 2 best quarterbacks in the league. I think Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State all have really good defenses. And I'm excited to see these teams once that little mini round robin starts in towards the end of the season, with all those matchups, and we get to put talk of toughness to the side, and we just see these teams play. But until then, I think it's anyone's guess out of those 3 teams who's going to kind of come out of it. So Excited to see what comes of all of that with Penn State also winning very impressively on Saturday night against Iowa as well. They look like a real contender here, as we kind of thought coming into the season.
And I guess my last point on the Ryan Day and Ohio State thing. I mean, I know there was the we played one bad half of football the last few years, and you hit on outscoring them 28-3 in the second half of last year's game against Michigan.
There was also the Oregon game. Yeah.
There was the Oregon game. There was the second half of the game in 2021 where I believe Michigan outscores them 28-14. Math is hard.
So he said in his press conference that that's the half he was talking about. He said he clarified and said we had one bad half up in Ann Arbor 2 years ago, which I would have thought it would have been the one in Columbus. But he's talking about 2 years ago in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, I mean, both those years too, obviously, spirals out of control late. They're one-score games in the fourth quarter, but it just goes to show it's another game where if you get this Ohio State team in a four-quarter football game, they are extremely beatable. And Notre Dame had their chances to do that. I look at, and it's not just Michigan either. It's, they gave up 18 points in the fourth quarter of that playoff game. Should have beaten Georgia. They'll blame a missed kick on it, but really, you got to finish up. You got to finish the game, and they haven't done enough of that against the Georgias and the Michigans of the world.